Welcome, everyone. I'm Serinda Martinetti, C Chicago Dancers Community Engagement Manager. Welcome to our Dance for Camera Fundamentals workshop number 2. I just wanted to let you know that my preferred pronouns are she, her. I am a light-skinned, biracial, Southeast Asian and European woman with short, purpley pink hair. I'm sitting in my home office with large windows behind me, and I'm wearing polka dots like I usually do. I would like to recognize that my home sits on the traditional lands of the people of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and the Ottawa, as well as the Miami, Menominee, and Ho-Chunk nations. I'd also like to acknowledge the following statements. We work in different communities with different resources. We have different sorts of practice and we have different aesthetics and politics. We use different language based on our own communities and situations, but we believe everyone in this room intends to be respectful. For this session, we seek to create an environment where people can speak freely without feeling worried that they will inadvertently offend someone else by the way they speak. We gather together to share, reflect, question, and learn. If you're someone who tends to not speak a lot, please feel free to move into a role of speaking more. And if you tend to speak a lot, then please move into a role of listening more. But our goal for these workshop series is to talk to each other and learn and share and be open about what we know and what we don't know. I wanted to also tell you that this session is being recorded for distribution to everyone in the workshops who has registered, and then later for public. With that, I am going to hand over to Enki, who is our main instructor, and Enki will take us through a course overview.
Hello, I'm Enki Andrews. He, him, currently residing in Chicago. It's wonderful to be here with you. The overall scope of the course is that we want to get the most out of the equipment that we have while focusing on harmonious camera movement with the dancer. So it's a dance course or dance filming kind of focus. We're going to focus on camera operation, composition, some camera motion, and we'll touch on sound as well. We're also going to touch a little bit on sound quality capture, and depending on how fast things go, we might touch on some editing concepts or something like that. So that's it for that. And then today we'll be doing a brief review of some of the basics of ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. And I think that's it for now.
Overall, this course focuses on asking you questions about what your inspiration is, thinking about your inspiration, thinking about your aesthetic, thinking about your point of view, and how with the use of the camera, we can translate all those sorts of things to dance for screen. I wanted to introduce our wonderful guest instructor for today, Professor Millicent Johnnie. Millicent, I will let you introduce yourself. Please tell us a little bit about your experience and where you're coming from, and let you take it away.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the opportunity to be here in community with you all. I'm actually calling from Louisiana, in an area that was historically known as the Attakapas-Palucis Prairie. I'm a descendant of African, Spanish, French, and the Attakapas indigenous folk here. I currently live in Tallahassee, Florida, also known as the Appalachian Province. I am of French Creole descent, and yeah, African-American woman, brown skin tone, blonde tips, dark black hair, wearing some an ethnic top from Trinidad and Tobago with some South African earrings that are blue and aqua, seated in front of a window. I guess it's double pane window, red and orange colored brick. And yeah, today we're going to be talking about the story behind the picture, and some things that kind of inspired me for some of my projects. And then we'll transition into working with Enoch. Am I pronouncing that Enoch? Enoch? Am I pronouncing that correct?
Enki.
Enki. Transitioning to some work with Enki, and then you all are going to come back with me to just kind of end our session together with putting some things in practice. So I'm really excited about that. I am a filmmaker, choreographer, director, producer. I run a small production company in Florida called Millicent Johnnie Films, and primarily we work with a lot of theaters and dancers who are interested in taking a lot of their site-specific work or site-responsive work and placing it in a cinematic film medium. So I'm really pleased with some of the work we've been able to do. We're a fairly new company. We actually started during the pandemic. I have my MFA in choreography and an MFA in film production from Florida State University. And I've just been building work for a very long time in theater, dance, and music. And I don't know, I felt like it was, I was in this kind of watershed moment in my life where I felt like I wanted another platform to kind of broaden my portfolio a bit. And so I decided to go to film school after like 20 something years in the business. And it was great. I thought taking 2 years off to go to this, rigorous program was really going to kind of slow down my momentum in theater and dance, but it did the complete opposite. So I'm really excited about being able to share some of those things that I've acquired in film school, but also just over the past 20-something years in the dance and theater industry. So I'll get started. Today's process, we're gonna call it making a dance film. Let me see if I can try to share my screen with you all. Just give me 1 second. Let me know if you all are seeing my screen. It should be an orange screen that says making a dance film at the top. Do you all see that? Perfect. Can you all still see me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Oh, awesome. Oh, great. And I can still see you. Wonderful. So this is just kind of a guide into one of the many processes that I tend to tap into when I'm building work, and particularly filmmaking. I gave you a little spill about who I was. This particular course was designed to help folks generate a 3-minute short film. Today we're going to do like some 15, 30-second studies, but the information is definitely, I think, will be useful to you even in your 15, 20, 30-second studies. So that's me. At the bottom of the screen there, I was directing a film called Bamboula Is Not Bamboozled, and we were shooting on a cinematic camera, shooting in 7K. And, it was fun. Prior to that, I was using cell phones and DSLR cameras, which are, not necessarily cinematic cameras. Well, nowadays you can use a cell phone, especially an iPhone, to shoot cinematic projects, but the DSLR, not so much. But it was great for me because it got me over this kind of hump of being intimidated, as far as being behind the camera. So this is an image from that particular film, Bamboula Is Not Bamboozled. We're going to do an exercise called The Story Behind the Picture. So I just kind of want you to take in what you're seeing. And we're just going to kind of shoot off the top of the dome. What's coming up for you? What do you think the story is behind this picture? What are you seeing? And we can just kind of popcorn it. If you want to unmute your videos so that we can really be in this kind of shared virtual space, that would be great. So any thoughts? What's coming up for you? What's the story behind the picture?
I think it's strange because they look very emotional and there's tears running down their face, but what they're wearing looks very celebratory. Mm-hmm. Bright colored with the yellow and the red and the sequins. It reminds me of some of the funeral processions that I've seen in New Orleans, mm-hmm. of kind of like that celebration of life that's also sadness.
Yeah. Other thoughts? Larissa, what's coming up for you?
Well, I first noticed the tears, the little bit of a discord, as she was saying, but I felt it was a little bit more some emotion. You're striving for something, or you tried to do something and you're just really, really disappointed in yourself. You didn't achieve whatever it is. You didn't, like if you were walking a tightrope, you missed, like catching the flying girl coming or something. I don't know what, but something didn't go the way you wanted. And so it's just a great emotional release. Like I see it more sadness, like they could be tears of joy, but I don't see it as tears of joy. It's something sad or frustrating, upsetting.
Well, let's talk about the colors. What do you all think the colors are related to, or why would this particular character be in those particular colors?
I feel like sorry.
No, go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Enki.
The colors that I noticed everything is it's rather bright, except for the main character, who seems to be, well, obviously crying, and I projected a kind of like upset, like she's saddened. But then the colors are very bright, so I feel like there's a contrast there, and all the clothing is very new. It looks very well, looks fresh. So I feel like there's a contrast between this new appearance and new style, or not style, but just brand new clothing. And I can't make out the hat or the white headpiece. So that's like actually kind of curious to me, whether it's a bonnet or whether it's a cap.
Cool. I heard, so Surinder, you offered that it's the wardrobe is similar to what you've seen in New Orleans, right? In some of those funeral processions. So she's in a suit and she's in these really bright colors. Are there any ideas as far as social associations to the suit and the bow tie that anyone else can offer? Like where would we see this, a red suit and a yellow bow tie with sequin and
Carnival or a performance?
Yep. All right.
Band leader, or like a sort of like processional leader, dancer. I mean, there's the sequins for me always brings up that kind of like dance kind of team aesthetic.
Absolutely. So let's just kind of talk about everything that we've offered in this space within the last 5 minutes.
But I also feel like the way the character fills our screen and yet feels very enclosed, like it's both simultaneously broad because they're reaching outside of the frame, but also it feels like they're being like compacted, or they're in a small space.
Yes. So if I can just get a volunteer, if someone can just kind of summarize the story that we as a collective have come up with based on this particular image. We've got some really juicy gems that came up. So there's no right or wrong answer, but just based on what the collective has come up with, as far as our observations of what's happening in this one particular frame, what's the story? Anybody want to take a stab at it? Crack at it? A go at it? A dance at it? Anybody?
Indoor performance of something related to something maybe in New Orleans or something.
Yes. And what about the character?
And the character, I'll let somebody else take that.
A processional or band leader.
Processional band leader in an indoor performance. think about anything that was kind of offered in there's really no wrong answer. And in a space that feels broad, but also intimate and tight and confined. And ¿qué más? What else? Do anybody recall anything else that we said about this one particular character? Nope. All right.
Well,
Well,
really
let's see how.
expressing emotion. So it is like, a performance that is really emotional for, I mean, I think it looks like on their face for them personally.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Let's see how accurate we are. Let's see what comes up. Oh, wait, what's happening? Oh, there we go. All right. So this just kind of describes what we've just done. We shared the photo with the participants, and then we'll narrate to the group what the photo is about. We did that as a collective. Then the owner, myself, I'm going to reveal what the story is. So basically in this particular moment, this dancer has been touring with a Black dance company, and the artistic director decides that particular season, they're going to perform a piece that's looking at minstrelsy done on Black performers. And this particular dancer is not having it. So they wrestle with this idea of, dealing with this fraught history that's tied to racism and systemic oppression, and at the same time that honors those Black folks who have used that particular platform as a means of protest and resistance. And by the time we get to this section in the film, she has run out, and she's wrestling with the emotions that have been coming up for her for actually dancing in blackface. Anything new or unusual that, based on what I just shared with you as far as the plot and the story, anything surprising by that storyline that I just shared with you?
I think the minstrel aspect, I think, is really powerful because I also I know another creator who's focused on minstrel and the role of minstrel shows in America. So I can see how that would be somebody who's not having that. Although I don't know what the relationship is between the clothing. Like, is the clothing like a minstrel appearance, or?
It is. Yeah. It is a minstrel's uniform. So it's Surrender mentioned New Orleans, and New Orleans, we had something called benevolent societies, where we would basically, Black folks didn't have access to proper burial rights. So we created these benevolent societies so that folks could pay 5 cents, 10 cents towards these societies, which would guarantee them a jazz funeral. And this is the uniform that they wore during that particular time. So this is at the turn of the 19th and going into the 20th century. So that's why it's very period specific. And when you go to second lines in New Orleans, they still wear the same wardrobe and costuming. This film is based on a dance theater piece that I staged with Cleo Parker Robinson Dance in Denver, Colorado. And the larger work looks at the connection between New Orleans minstrel practices on Black bodies with Cape Town's minstrel carnival, which is also another parade practice on Black bodies. And you can see the tie between the wardrobe to the period, as well as the music and the sound and the dancing. So why should people even care about this particular story or these themes that have come up in this particular film? Why do you all think people should care? Do you think people should care?
Yes, it's extremely relevant now and always about like what's happening to Black bodies through the lens of performance, and how minstrel performances were portrayed by white people wearing blackface. And I think it's still somewhat prevalent in the media that there are still white people wearing blackface and they don't understand why that's a problem. for me, it's interesting. I didn't, even though I've been to New Orleans and I've seen these benevolent societies and I've seen the processional funerals, I didn't grow up in the US, and I grew up in, Asian countries where it's very different. I didn't realize that was actually a uniform. I just recognized that the clothing was, a costume. But it's really interesting to know that, like, there are Black performers who are using the minstrel performance to say what they need to say to push against stereotypes and racism. But I can also understand the internal struggle of a Black person, or empathize, but being told, like, I want you to portray this, and how difficult that is for a person to reconcile themselves with the internal and the external, and for someone else to tell them to do this rather than it coming from themselves.
Yeah, minstrelsy made Blackness a teachable concept for white audiences. And, what I love about coming from places like Louisiana is that we give ourselves the right to wrestle with our own baggage. we give ourselves the right to wrestle with what W.E.B. Du Bois calls double consciousness, where you're living in two states of consciousness. One is rooted in this understanding of whiteness because of colonization, but also the other is rooted in Africana-ness and indigenous, because that's what you came to this particular soil with. And so because we have found ways to hold on and maintain a lot of our African and indigenous retentions and traditions, it shows up in a lot of things like our carnival practices. And so while some people may not understand why, especially in New Orleans, there's this great pride to put on, the paint and make fun of the white folks and those systems that historically did not see us, Black folks find it as a way of being resilient, of saying, no, that's actually not who we are. You cannot teach Blackness, you cannot teach these cultural understandings. And because you can't do it, we're going to put it in your face and show you and dance about it. In the streets that you said that we no longer have access to, that we didn't have a right to participate in. So it's very revolutionary. And I think, often we don't necessarily understand what our stories mean until we kind of put it in front of an audience, right? We carry certain things with us, but until we kind of share it with other people, we don't really know what it does for us. And sometimes we have to hear ourselves speak about it and talk about it and wrestle and interrogate some of these things so we can understand how it contributes to a larger narrative around, what is American culture. So that particular exercise I got from Joe Lambert. He's a longtime alternate roots member. I am an alternate roots member. I need to pay my dues so that I can stay active. But I joined the organization almost 20 years ago, and I have just, found a lot of the techniques as around cultural organizing, just extremely beneficial to my work as an artist. So that's just one of them. Now let's take a look at Bamboula. So this is about a 5-minute film. I want you all to just kind of see how, how we were able to come up with a story that's pretty similar and parallel to what the larger narrative is in this particular 5-minute film. So let's see what happens. All right. So that was Bamboula. Were we close? Were we accurate in our story that we conjured prior to viewing it? Any thoughts?
Not really, but
we weren't accurate. You don't think you were close? Why not?
I mean, to me, it felt, I don't know. I mean, it was still very emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Other thoughts? Responses? Nope. All right. Nothing is coming up for anyone? Yes.
I was going to say that structurally, it was very sound. I enjoyed the whole narrative feature of the whole thing, of learning what the piece was going to be, dancer's reaction, and then ultimately, right before even going out, seeing like what the full scope of why they were going to do the performance in the first place, was definitely on point. I really enjoyed it because there's a lot of dance films that don't have that thing that kind of brings it all together, where you can see the evolution of the dance from multiple different perspectives, in this case, the dancers. So I did enjoy that. I thought it was very well done.
Cool. Awesome. What about the composition of what you were seeing visually? What did you notice about the way it was shot? Anybody? Is there anything that resonated with you in the way it was shot, in the shot design itself? What moments felt more emotional? Surinder, you said it was very emotional. So what moments made it emotional? Do you remember visually what was happening in the frame?
So I think when the dancer, ran, anytime she removed herself from the group was when we really felt her emotion. And in those shots, I think the frame became tighter, more on that person, as opposed to kind of like the broad group shots. So we're really focusing in on her experience and her emotion, and really what's going through her head and her heart as a Black dancer trying to reconcile herself with all of these themes and emotions. And I'm a crier. Whenever I see anyone crying, I cry.
No, I understand.
I can't help myself. And I really like when she ran off stage and we saw, the moment that we saw in the photo, I'm like, oh my God, I can really like feel her like anxiety and frustration. And because we went from kind of like those broad shots to something that was really narrow and focused, but also going from like the dark studio or the dark stage to kind of like this white area, was kind of like also flipping that juxtaposition.
Yeah, her aha moment was in natural light, her seeing the light, I would say metaphorically, if we were to go there. What about the jump cuts in the mirror when she first storms out of the studio? Emotionally, what did those jump cuts do for you all? Did it do anything? So what I mean by jump cut is that we are quickly going from story beat to story beat in a short matter of time. So editing wise, we're jumping from one point of action to another point of action. So we're playing with time in a sense. What did that do emotionally for you, or did it do anything? How did it make you feel seeing her go from playing with time in that way? Larissa, thoughts?
Well, it becomes a little more intense, and then in the bathroom there were cuts to his face as well, so it creates kind of a confrontation a little bit.
Yeah, it's a way for us to really build tension. Not only just between her and the artistic director, but she can build emotional tension within herself just by playing so many tight cuts in a short period of time, right? So she was constantly wrestling with her emotions, and she had moments where she thought it was funny. She had moments where she was like, I'm in complete awe and disbelief, And so I think just as human beings, we have those moments in time where you're in such a state of disbelief that you have all of these thoughts just kind of compressed in space, and you have to sit and deal with that. So then our question as filmmakers is, how do we help the audience understand emotionally where this particular character is at in the way that we shoot it? For that particular scene, I knew that I wanted to use jump cuts because, you know, anytime that you're dealing with any kind of, I would say, trauma, for us in this particular film, we're dealing with a lot of racial trauma. You know, your state, the challenge to portray your emotional state, not only as the individual that's dealing with the racial trauma, but also the collective body that is carrying that kind of racial trauma. You know, I think you have to be really just kind of open to figuring out ways to help the audience empathize with you even more. So that's how we chose to do that.
That was very effective. I thought that that your jump cuts in that scene really showed her emotional, like the multitude of emotions that one feels sometimes, and the jump cuts really, that for me was one of the most powerful cinematic things, a way to approach it, you know, while still keeping, without multiple layers or breaking it up into little quads or something like that. I thought it was
awesome.
Did you know that that is what you wanted to do when you went in to shoot it? Like you went in thinking these were going to do jump cuts rather than just kind of like taking the shot?
Yes, we have, not only do we work with a shot list, we work with what we call a setup schedule. So in order for us to make sure that we can shoot the entire movie in the way that we want, we put all of the shots according to a schedule based on the sun and based on access to different locations and things like that. So I don't remember because we shot this like 2 years ago, but I want to say we probably carved out about 1 hour and 15 just to get that one scene. And that was building in the lighting setup for that particular shot, making sure we could build all of the rigs that we needed for those slider shots, and getting a camera rehearsal in there with the actors, as well as making sure we had enough takes in the individual setup. So each time she was at the mirror, that was a different setup, right? It was a different camera angle. So every time that we changed the camera angle, that was according to what we had scheduled for that particular setup.
So a lot of planning went into knowing that that's what you wanted to get. It wasn't serendipity, it was planning to get you there.
Oh yeah, pre-production. We'll get to that in a little bit. Yeah, absolutely. All of that was developed in pre-production, and we do camera tests. Like even when I'm shooting a documentary film, I always do camera tests to make sure that whatever I'm expecting to happen, it's going to happen in some decent light. It's going, you know, I'm going to make sure that all of my camera settings are what I need it to be in order for me to feel emotionally, to get the tone that I need for those particular moments. You know, documentary, well, at least, you know, it's different for everybody, but the way I like to work is, and I guess that's just based on my education, the training that I have. We never do anything that isn't planned. You expect for wonderful things to happen, right? You expect wonderful things to happen, and you build in cushion for those kind of serendipitous moments to happen. But definitely you want to make sure that your camera settings, your lighting and gaffing, and all of your gear that you may need to capture it are accessible and available to you, and you build that into your schedule. So, quick question: why is your voice important as a dance maker, storyteller? Why is it important? Anybody? Why do we feel like using storytelling? I mean, I think oftentimes dancers don't necessarily consider themselves storytellers, and we are. But why do we think as a collective it's important to have a voice as a storyteller?
Can you elaborate on what you mean by voice?
Your voice as in how you use your platform to speak about, respond to, contest as an artist and storyteller. Your voice as your body of work, your actual voice, your demeanor in space, the way you behave in community, your being. Why is it important? Why is your being important as a storyteller?
When I was a performer and just dancing for someone else in someone else's choreography, I felt like I was a body without a head and that I had no voice. But I was also really young. And it has been, I don't really move my body too much anymore, but I tell stories, I write, and I actually use my actual voice to tell these stories. But I also realized that I tell these stories through my body. It's experience for me. It's about knowing that I have a point of view, that whatever, the stories that I tell are usually personal stories that hopefully teaches someone something, or I get closer to someone, but that it's how I connect with either the individual or a group on stage.
I think for me, it is about, I guess it's the same thing, connecting with other folks. And I'm always wrestling and trying to figure out how to deepen my own understanding of my humanity, and the way that I do that, I try to position myself in community with other people. And I put on this presentation, another kind of principle that I got from Alternate Roots really early on in my career. Cultural equity means believing in the inherent genius of every cultural community. I think sometimes, I can say this just from my own experience as a Black filmmaker from the South. Often, I grew up with sharecroppers. In my lifetime, my great-grandmother was a sharecropper, and she rode a horse and buggy until 1984. And when I was coming up, I never thought that the stories of my grandparents who were sharecroppers was important. I never thought that my relationship to them was important. It wasn't important enough to either put it on stage. It wasn't important enough to put in a film. I never celebrated the genius that came out of being from this particular community and area. And so it took me years to understand how to celebrate my being, the things that I contribute to my artistic practices, but also to communities, as something that was, worthy of being celebrated or even recorded, And so I always try to help when I engage with dancers, whether it's on stage, and site-specific, site-responsive platforms, or even in film, that it doesn't matter what story you're telling, everyone has a story to tell. And I think even in some of the more abstract, the quote unquote experimental dance films or whatnot, there's a voice and there's a storyteller that's using that camera and using that platform as a lens to be able to either reach an audience or to share something deeper about themselves, So I just wanted to offer that to the collective, that, this kind of inherent genius comes from everyone. That simple exercise of looking at a picture and deciding what, then generating an idea based on, or generating a product or a project based on something as simple as, a young woman in tears in a bright, red and yellow wardrobe and costume can create a film that's looking at this kind of larger narrative about the Black experience in performance and in theater.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So as a dancer, and oh, by the way, Nejla Yatkin says hello.
Oh, hi, Nejla.
She was like, oh, you're going to talk with her? Great. But anyway, so in thinking about your dance voice, right? And if you came up as a dancer and you had a voice, or you were learning how to communicate your voice through your body language, whether, site specific or in how the production was presented, how has that voice and experience and knowledge and intuition affected your film voice? And then what is the synthesis that you feel that you gained or discovered in combining these two forms of communication?
I've always been curious. I've always asked a lot of questions. And I was the young child when all the elders would be speaking in French, even though I understood French a little bit. My first language was French, but after like 5, I forgot a lot of it. But I would be the child in the corner, just kind of listening and eavesdropping and trying to pick up the nuances and the subtleties of the body language and what I could hear in some of those stories. And my mother was an organizer my entire life. And, you know, when I went to school, I had 2 systems of education. I had my quote unquote formal education, which completely did not include any of the Black experience or Black revolutionary, Black Pan-African liberation ideas. And then I had my mother, who was an organizer, who was like, you're going to read about apartheid, you're going to understand it, you're going to read, you're going to watch these films about Black liberation, you're going to understand what this means. And so as a child, you know, you're taking dance classes. I went to an all-Black dance studio. I went to predominantly PWIs, predominantly white institutions for my education. So again, that double consciousness that I talked about earlier, that has been part of my cultural makeup as an artist in general. So when I transitioned into filmmaking, it really, I didn't shift. I used my platform to speak about freedom fighting. You know, I worked on a major motion picture called Scary Movie 5. It was a Weinstein Company film. And I did the same thing. They hired me to do what they called absurd ballet, because it was a spoof on Black Swan, the thriller, the ballet thriller. And I did the same thing. I worked with like Usher and Ashley Tisdale. I came in with some historical information about the dances that they were going to learn. I talked about what communities they came from. I talked why I spoke about why it was important to dance them, being deeply rooted in these kind of cultural textures. And we made it funny, you know? I took something like Point and mixed it with pole dancing because the director wanted a pole dance scene. And I was like, all right, well, is there budget for us to go check out some pole dance culture? You know, so production sent us to like the hottest strip clubs in Atlanta. And we got to meet like the dancers and we watched them. We brought in a pole dance instructor to put it on my body and to, you know, the actors' bodies. And then I created some choreography around that. You know, that was when I was a choreographer. In my own filmmaking, it's the same thing. You know, I was taught, you know, at Florida State, they have this thing, they're really big into quote unquote industry standard filmmaking. And so coming up as a cultural organizer, to me, when you look at a filmmaking process, especially with you know, when you're dealing with a crew and a producer and, you know, a producing team, if there is an understanding that every person has a role and that role contributes to the larger collective and the larger collective believes in the thing that we're making, you really can use the filmmaking process to help folks understand how to, going back to that quote, that there's inherent genius in every cultural community, you know, that there's a way that you can validate the individual and at the same time validate the collective body that is being in response to these individuals that are, you know, contributing to this larger thing. So it hasn't, you know, I think if anything, it has only broadened my portfolio. I haven't shifted my way of being. I haven't shifted why I create the things that I create. The inspirations are still the same. You know, I'm about speaking truth to power. I'm about celebrating Blackness and Southern culture and contributing to this narrative around humanity. You know, I'm interested in talking about the invisible body, the stories that have never been told because we were sharecroppers or descendants of sharecroppers and formerly enslaved people of, you know, Southwest Louisiana. You know, so that hasn't really changed. When I started learning more about camera techniques because I was a dancer and a choreographer, I mean, you could see in Bamboula, yeah, we used a lot of what we call standard coverage, like wide, medium, close-ups. You know, we had a few transforming shots, but for the most part, I wanted my DP to dance with the camera because I wanted the audience to feel what it felt like to be on stage with those dancers, to feel what it felt like to be in the rehearsal studio with those dancers, and also have a sense of grounding in geography, you know, so that they could picture themselves in the space and be involved in the conversation. I have a tendency to use a lot of close-ups because I love when you can feel what other people feel, you know, tapping into the emotional places and the emotional beats of story, the emotional beats. Even if you know, if we were to only look at the dance section, like when they were on stage, I use the same approach, you know, close-ups. Why? Because I want to feel what she feels. Wide shots, objectively, because I want to see the space. I want to get a sense of how large that space is, or how expansive that space is. When she feels trapped and confined, I want to know what that feels like, and I want the audience to feel those things. But I'm the same way when I'm choreographing as well. You know, I've always been into story. I come from a history and a family, a long lineage of what we call griots. And these were the keepers of oral traditions, right? They were in Africana and many indigenous cultures, they were the folks that taught you about your family lineage, your morals. They spoke to you in parables and what we call apadakis, to teach you about these different ways of using energy and love and light and indigenous botanical knowledge to understand who you are and how you preserve and protect the planet. So I haven't changed. It hasn't shifted. I have tried, but there's something that always brings me back to, like, you know, this grounding in my own, my identity. Does that make sense? That's a long-winded answer, but
That's great. That's great.
So Millicent, I'm really just cognizant of time. And I know we need to get to Enki's instruction section, but I know we didn't get through all of your presentation. Is there something that you know, feel like we're missing, something that we that you want to share with us before we take a quick break and then switch over to learning with Enki?
No, I mean, the section that I was gonna I wanted to focus on was story, you know, and the importance of sharing story and understanding that everyone has their own story, and, you know, wanted to give you all just an exercise to help you see how easy it is to generate an idea, you know, to really tap into this ideation phase. You know, similar to this slide that I have here, you know, it helps us understand what divides us, but also what brings us together. You know, I think because Andy's going to move us into the production part, I just really wanted to help us understand how we go from a concept phase into a production phase. The concept phase happens in pre-production. Now, Enki's going to break down, I think, gear, ISO, and aperture, right, Enki? Is that right? Yeah. So, you know, now we're going to shift into cinematography and production. I think it works. Do you all have any questions? Yes, sir.
I always have questions. In terms of editing, when you choreograph something and you kind of know, like, oh, you're gonna put it this way, and then maybe you switch something. How did filmmaking? How did you incorporate your dance mindset into, like, filming mindset? That's kind of like one part of the question. The other part of the question is, when you edit, how do you think about that in light of, like, all the pre-production, the planning that you've done, and then when you get in the edit bay, you know, what's your philosophy or process or reflex?
Yeah, going back to Corey, it hasn't really shifted. The only difference is, you know, I'm a bit more organized in filmmaking, because you kind of have to be, especially when you're dealing with some particular software. But I have always been the type to give myself the freedom to edit in the overall creative process, right? So I never create a piece of work and think that that's it. Like, I'm always going back, making adjustments, posing questions. You know, I really try to lean into, like, the critical thinking aspect of what I'm trying to say, and then I hold myself accountable. I also like the editing process, whether it's on stage, like in the studio, or in post-production. Your story is going to change. You have to be okay with it's going to change. Like, you can go in with as much planning as possible, but when you actually put the footage into the software and you have that footage being, projected back to you, you're going to see different nuances that fit together in a different way. So, they're just I always give myself space and freedom to make adjustments, and space and freedom to question even my questions, so that by the time I'm done, there's a deep, grounded feeling that I can stand behind that work, that I've held myself accountable to do the thing that I said that I'm going to do. And I've given myself some liberty and some freedom to let this thing be alive and to suggest what it wants to be, just more specifically, as far as the editing process and post-production, we create a daily sequence, which is where we basically put in story order or scene order or whatever kind of order we're shooting it in. And we watch every single take. And then I take notes on which takes I like and what takes I don't like. Often that happens when we're in production as well. So I can just kind of shift through some of the kind of throwaways, the footage that I know I'm not going to use. And then once we have the daily sequence, I just do a really quick rough cut, just so I can make sure that I have something that has some legs. And then we'll do a rough assembly, and I'll do several assemblies until I get to the thing that I feel like I want it to make. And then I'll go in and do triage. And then I'll bring in either the other producers or the other creatives to come in and make suggestions and offerings. And then we actually go through a coloring process, a sound design process with all of the films that I work on. So I'm never in the space by myself. I'm not like in the creative space by myself. I'm either working with a really good friend of mine, Harrison Cole Smith, as my editor, or James McKenzie as my editor. And then my DPs most of the DPs that I've worked with have been women or folks who identify as women. And they, we're like sister friends. I can be very honest with them. They can be very honest with me. There's an element of trust where I know that it's the offerings that they're giving are about the work, And again, going back to that cultural organizing phase where everyone understands that there's value, that what they're bringing to the space, and they're clear about their roles, that plays out in the post-production phase as well. So while we have a system in place to keep us organized, we also have this liberty and freedom to just kind of shoot ideas, and hold each other accountable as far as the ideas that we want to share, the cultural understandings and the ways of knowing and the ways of being that we want to express in that particular film. Like, I've got my counsel that's always with me, holding myself, holding me accountable. So, yeah. Thank you all so much. I'm going to hang out and listen to Enki's section, and then I'm going to come back at the end.
Why don't we stretch our legs, take a short 5-minute break, get some water, go to the bathroom, get a snack, and we'll be back at 1:20, so 1:21.
Awesome.
All right. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you for all attending. Hey, Larissa. Hey, Kennedy. Hi, Kennedy, are you there? Can you hear us? Thank you so much, Professor Millicent. It's great to see you. I thought I would.
I see that. Oh, that's so beautiful. Yes.
So yeah, Cleo is just wonderful. Just a great energy and a force of nature. It's so fun. Maybe we'll talk another time about that. Okay, so I wanted to kind of summarize what we talked about briefly during the first class. I'm hearing some microphone toggling there. So, we talked a little bit in the first class about inspiration, because inspiration is kind of where everything comes from. And as Millicent was saying, you've got your concept, you've got your inspiration, and that's what gets the ball rolling, or hopefully an avalanche going. And then you get all the momentum, and it gives you enough momentum to get over all the challenges that you might encounter as you attempt to finish your project. But inspiration is really the main thing. But you have your inspiration and you get your idea going, but then you're like, okay, well, I want to do a good job. And there's 4 stages in a film process. You have your inspiration, you have your pre-production, your planning, etc. And you actually have your shooting, your capture, and then you have your post-production. And that's pretty much all I'm going to say about that, because we're not going to go into depth, certainly not into post-production. But inspiration is the most important thing. But like after inspiration, you have your planning, and similar to everything else in life, you get out what you put in. So the more planning you do, and preparation and thinking and writing little notes, etc., the more likely it is that you'll get lucky to finish everything you wanted to. And like dance, it's not simple, but with practice and planning, you can make it look simple. Not that it ever was. So I wanted to back up a little bit and think about why we're talking about some of these fundamental camera elements. And those fundamental camera elements are learning to control your ISO, learning to control your shutter speed, learning to control your depth of field. Those are your main ones. There's other aspects there, such as dynamic range and camera angles and lenses that we'll also get into. But these 3 you can control in the camera: the ISO, the shutter speed, and the aperture. Outside the camera, you can think of the lens perhaps a little bit as outside of the camera, but you do want to probably control that. And then further afield, you have to think about what your lens is seeing. So there's the scene that you're capturing with your camera, and then there's the light that's hitting that scene. And then it's how your camera is interpreting the light that's hitting it. And that combination of scene, and I even have an example prepared. If you would bear with me one moment. There we go. All right, so we have our scene. Now this is actually 2 scenes. And we have our, as we all know, we've got the character. Oh, I have to find a way. I'll do it by hand. We've got our scared Mechazilla being chased by the terrifying, or perhaps just participating with the mannequin in the background. So that's our scene, and we have our lighting there. And then to the left, I think it's on your left. The camera is to your left. Okay, great. You can see there that we have the camera with the settings that are being used to capture the actual portrait on the right-hand side. And what I wanted to show here is that if you can control your lighting, et cetera, you can control the focus of the audience and what they are seeing. So when you put together your lighting and your camera and your positioning, you're controlling what the audience is going to see. And in this case, what we've done is we've picked a pretty shallow depth of field, right? And if you can see here, down here, we've picked up, well, actually you can't see it there. Over here, this is the aperture that the camera is set at, which you can see there, it's a 2.8. And that's the aperture for a camera that is a DSLR kind of camera. And that gives you a 2.8, gives you a shallow depth of field. So I'm going to show you here in a scene here where, let me,
What does shallow depth of field mean?
okay, 1 second, I will show you. So if we have, let's see that, great. All right, let's pick this one. Okay, so this is shallow depth of field. You have a foreground, oh, I'm pointing with my mouse again on the image. You have the finger in the foreground is relatively sharp. Meanwhile, the background is blurry, right? So shallow depth of field, or the small number on the lens, gives you a control over what is going to be in focus. So if I shift the focus deeper, now I've shifted the focus from the hand to further away, right? Now all I did was pull what's called pulling focus. I shifted the focus from one point to the other, but because the aperture was wide open at 2.8, then there's a narrow band that is in focus, and then everything else is blurry. And what that allows you to do is to control what the viewer is going to focus on. Because there's basically it's a what do they call it? Physiopsychal response, where your reflex is to look at what is in focus. Because we naturally ourselves in our own eyes have things that are in focus and out of focus, and your eye adjusts to that, and then your brain says, I care about what's in focus. And it also directs the eye to decide what is in focus. So all these examples are things where you have I'm going to silence this for a second. Okay, so, with this grass thing that's in focus versus the background, you get to control what people are seeing there. This is yet another example of shutters, of controlling your aperture. Now, in this image on the right-hand side, you can see that the image with f2.8 on the right has the flower in focus, and the background is blurry. And that's because you have a wide open aperture. When you shift to the f16, then both the foreground is in focus and the background is in focus. I'm going to show you now. I'm going to come back to Mechazilla, because who wouldn't want to do that? And give me a second here. I believe, there we go. Okay, so back to Mechazilla. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change the focus point, and I'm not going to change the aperture. I'm just going to change the focus. So if I shift the focus here, and I have to lean away from my screen, so I'm not sure what the camera is seeing. There, I'm shifting towards the mannequin without having changed the aperture at all. I'm just pulling focus. I'm going from one to the other. And if you pay attention to what your brain is doing, your brain is probably deciding where it wants to look, and it's going to go back and forth between those two. So as a director, when you're composing something, you can control what it is that people are looking at. And in that way, you have all this agency as the filmmaker beyond something which is in deep focus, right? So in deep focus, here at f16, the audience might look at the foreground subject. They might look at the background. They can go anywhere. And if you'll notice, like in paintings, a lot of times that's the intent of paintings. When you have a painting, and I don't know if I have permission to use one, but I won't. When you have a painting, your eye will roam around the painting, right? Your eye roams through the painting, through the scene, because it's like, oh, that's interesting, that's interesting, that's interesting. And the painter has decided that they want to create an environment for you to explore, perhaps, or just an emotion, and we'll come to that in a second. But yet you as a filmmaker, if you want to have people roam through the scene, that's great. But then you have to give them the time to do it, right? So if you want to put up a scene that has some complexity to it in the space, then you need to put up that shot and let it sit for a bit so that the audience can navigate through. And hopefully then you've arranged your composition to make it valuable and purposeful to have the audience explore. Now, as a dancer and as a dance filmer, or filmer of dance, often, not every time, but often the dancer will be moving, right? And just like every magician knows, people will look at what's moving, right? We usually don't pay attention to something that's static. Our eye will wander away. So if you're gonna shoot dance, you can set up the scene and people are probably gonna be watching the dancer because the dancer is moving, or they're gonna watch whatever is moving. So that's the fundamental kind of like ideas, which I think everybody knows, but for all those people who might be attending later, not the experienced souls such as yourselves. That was what did I want to talk about. Now, so for some of the beginners, I'm going to now jump back and discuss a little bit back to ISO and Aperture and these initial fundamentals that we're talking about here. So if I go to this, right, we're back to ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. And for myself, I'll put this in and I'll pop back in. All right, now, this section here, right, on this side, as you go down, more light comes in because your aperture, you see on the bottom, well, this is actually inverse. More light is coming in because your shutter is open longer. Thus, things are brighter. That's one main thing. Brighter going longer time exposure. On the other side down here, as you change your aperture, and let's start with the bright part. Let's say you're open, full open, right? As you go away, as you close down your aperture, you reduce light. Okay, those are that. And then within this, within ISO, here you can increase the amount of light going in at the top, or you can decreasing as you go towards a lower number. Now, why do we want to control all these things? Why do we really care? Can't we just set it for automatic and be done with it? Which cell phones are actually excellent at doing. So this is where some kinds of aesthetics come in. And now I'm going to open up these questions here. When I have a shot, right, or I'm going to turn this down for a second and bring myself back in. Okay, so if you have something which is perhaps a scene like this, if you increase your ISO, right, the brightness is going to increase because ISO increases the brightness of the film. But in doing so, it begins to also produce noise. Is that, do I have my noise? Here we go. So, so in this section here, I've started to increase the noise. And that's a simulation of what's going to happen as you increase your ISO, right? So if your ISO is low, then you don't have as much noise. And as the ISO increases, you get more noise. So amongst the people here, tell me what you think might be a good use of, or is there any emotional effect that seeing this noise is having on you? or what would noise possibly be good for?
It makes me feel there's like some I feel disjointed from the image. It's I recognize it from horror films or thriller films, or when we're trying to portray ideas of other worlds, other dimensions. There's a disconnect between, you know, what is clear, or there's a sense of manipulating my understanding of clarity.
Surrender.
You're hiding something, or it's like out of time with reality. Or it could be, you know, like you're in a dream state, you're not quite like present.
Okay. All right. And do any of you remember like old films? Right. When you see an old film, you might get something that has a graininess or something like that. And so there's old films often have a lot of noise, right? Remember, there was hairs on the side, there was a line that was going through, things were like a little bit glitchy. There are all these effects that were kind of happening just by coincidence because of the technology in the old technologies. So one possible association that people have with noise is that it's older. You know, that you didn't have these pristine looks that we have now with a cell phone that's like 4K and everything's sharp and you can see everybody's little, you know, lines, hairs, whatever. So it's often subconsciously or consciously associated with things a little bit older, right? And it's also associated, and I don't know if everybody's aware of this, but if you go out at night yourself, if you're in your bedroom in the middle of the night and you go outside, you have rods and cones in your eyes, right? So you have kind of cells that are sensitive to black and white, and you have cells that are sensitive to color. And when things get dim, the cells that are sensitive to color don't work as well. But the cones that you have in your eyes are very sensitive to that. So you start to actually, if you try it out one time, go out and just pay attention, like, do you see noise in your own vision when things are dim? So I encourage everybody to try that and look at that, because you might notice that. And that's a subconscious thing that might be occurring, which also can be to your advantage when you're filming, because you might want a scene where somebody feels they're in a dark space. They are perhaps feeling vulnerable. They are feeling that they don't perceive things as well. There's a potential mood that you can kind of cultivate by doing that. And interestingly, today, people will shoot on a 4K camera, an 8K camera, right? And then afterwards, when they've collected this beautiful, pristine image and they've spent thousands of dollars to rent equipment, they will then go and add noise, right? And they'll blur the corners and they'll do this and they'll make it look like it was older film, or, you know, it was more faint grain, it was film. So it's an aesthetic that a lot of people go for. Now, from a, you know, this is all part of pre-production. If you know what kind of look you want to go for, then you can say like, oh, I can add that in post, or I can just be like, let me just use this old lens. Or I can also say, let me shoot this later, a little bit later, and I'll get the natural grain that I want. So these are all thoughts you can decide ahead of time in your pre-production to think about what's the aesthetic and the emotional consequence of the decisions that I make. So is that clear in terms of like ISO? Do you have any questions about ISO? No. Okay, fine. Moving on. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about Aperture. And what do I have here? I got selections A and B. Let's see. Boom, great. All right, so Aperture again, you've got your small aperture on the right-hand side, and that's the number on the lens associated with it, right? So f11, narrow. If we change, oops, sorry, I did not change what I intended to change. Give me a second. Section A. Do I have an example? Oh. There. Okay, so now let's go to the second part there, and this is in between. No, my mistake. Now let's go to B. That's 1, 2. There's 4. Okay, so these two match now. The image on the right is at f4, and the image on the left is the lens itself set to f4. And that's what the aperture looks like, right? So when f4 is letting in a little bit less light than f1.2, and I'm just for thorough purposes, I'm going to change this one here, and we'll do this. This is f11. No, we don't want that. We want there, f11, smallest aperture. Right, so you got your small aperture, and you've got your, well, they're both small apertures. All right, so with that said, I'm going to switch over to my background images, and oh, no, my apologies. Switch back to background. All right. And this is not what I wanted. 1 second, please. There and selection A. All right. Well, I'll just have to change this for selection A. All right, here we go. I think this scene is okay. So in this scene here, you've got you can see the little frog in the center, and you can see that the frog is in focus, and you can see the background in the trees. Yes. Okay. So that's f11. Note that the frog is in focus, the background's in focus. And I've got an aperture of, now note the lens is also, the lens is set at 24 millimeters. Okay, so that's slightly wide, slightly, it's called a wider aperture. And we have good depth of field. Now in this one, we're down to a f4, and it's a little bit blurrier, still at 24. And then here we're at f2.8, a little less blurry. I'm going to go through these other ones here. And what you're going to notice is that I've gotten closer to, in this case, the frog. And I'm back to an f11. Notice that. Notice the background. Notice the frog. Here, f4. Notice the background. Notice the frog. And now f2.8. Notice the background. Notice the frog. Now, what happens when I, so this is f2.8, and this is, no, and this is f2.8. Do you see a difference between the blur in the background between this image and this image? What are you noticing about those two? I'm just switching back and forth. I've just gone from The only thing I'm changing here is I'm a little bit closer, or actually I'm not changing, I'm just changing my focal length.
So the background is getting more blurry
Mhm.
as we're getting closer.
Uh-huh. More blurry as we're getting closer. Well, interestingly, it appears closer because this is wider angle. This one here is 24 millimeters, right?
Well, it depends on where my eye is. Like if I'm looking at the blue yoga roll, that seems more blurry. But if I'm looking at the white back of the chair, that's more in focus.
Uh-huh. And then over here, so here, I'm going to go one further. This is f2.8, and now this is f2.8 at, where is this? No, I'm going to stick with this one. Okay. So this is also f2.8, as was this, as was this. These are all with the same f-stop. But, and I haven't changed the aperture. I haven't, all I've changed is the millimeter of the lens, telephoto in. And you'll notice that the background, yeah, I guess, well, actually, this is perhaps a bad example, that the background between the 35 and the 70 is very different. But what you should be noticing, and this might be more apparent, is that there is a difference between being far away and shooting at 2.8 and being close and shooting at 2.8. So as you get closer, you also, your depth of field is narrower. And as you get further away, your depth of field gets bigger, independent of what you change, whether independent of your, dependent upon your aperture. So the effects of aperture when you are close are more apparent, is where I'm trying to get to here. This is f2, yeah. So in this case, I'm very close to the subject, and you can see that there's a huge difference in focus between the backgrounds, and although the background is far away. This is also what I was showing with the with this mecha thing, right? Where since the camera is very close to I'll show you how close. The camera's here, and this setup is just right there. So it's within a foot of each other, right? Lens, mecha, background. So you see there's a tremendous amount of blurriness there that's happening, because the camera is so close. So this is just something to think of when you are filming. Then if you're doing a close-up shot for somebody, the blurriness that you'll have at f2 or f2.8 is going to be magnified, versus if you're far away and you're just 5 feet away, then and still at an f2.8, then the depth of focus is larger as you go further away. So you're not going to have that same effect. Even though you're like, oh, I opened up my aperture all the way to 2.8 and things are just not as blurry as I'd hoped, right? And that's just a quality of the lens and something that happens when the physics of optics and light. So that's just something to keep in your mind, that how do I create a shallow depth of field? You're going to magnify your shallow depth of field as you get closer to the subject. All right.
In a dance setting, and maybe this is also a question for Millicent, like how do you use that concept when you're choreographing the piece or then shooting it, to think about like that depth of field of what you want the viewer to see and then how you shoot it?
I think it depends. Well, you have to kind of decide let me start from my own personal place. I'm always conscious of emotionally, where do I want this person, what do I want this person to feel? Like, where do I want them to be emotionally in the moment? And I
The
treat,
person being the viewer.
yes. Yeah. And I look at the frame in many ways in the same way that I see like the entrance to a proscenium, if we're dealing with a proscenium stage. And if I want them to be really, emotionally with the character, like if I want it to feel very subjective, for me, I tend to err on the side of using a more shallow depth of field. I want them to feel emotionally further away than, I use a longer depth of field. It really just depends emotionally where I want them in that particular moment and what I want them to focus on. I love racking focus because it's an easy way to keep a moment feeling very subjective, but also to nuance the storytelling to help the audience understand what that character is responding to in the environment. So it just depends on like what I'm trying to say in that particular moment, and then I just make choices based on emotionally and how I want the audience to feel. What about you, Enki?
Oh, I'm sorry, restate the question.
Just like an example, just like Millicent told us of like why you would choose a shallow depth of field or a deep depth of field. And yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad you asked. All right. So here I've chosen a shallow depth of field. Right now, what does this make you feel? Like, what's the relationship of the camera to the subject?
Go ahead, you go. Sorry, go
it's
ahead.
really intimate. Like to me, it feels really intimate. I mean, but we're also like just seeing part of the picture, and I don't know. Not really sure what I'm seeing.
Yeah. What are we seeing here, right? So
Wait. Go ahead, Enki.
Yeah. So when I shoot something, I think about what is the lens selection and what is the emotion that I want to elicit, either in, for the audience, but also like where I'm going. And it's funny because you're not always sure, right? You're like, okay, this might just be really interesting, like when you follow a close-up of a bug, right? Or these nature shows. You see something, it's small, it's tiny, you're close, you're like, okay, this little thing is now huge. That's one possible effect. But the other thing is it does have sometimes a kind of intimacy. So think about how you also relate to people. How often is it that you are, this close to somebody, right? It's rare. We are usually not that close to somebody unless we are actually pretty intimate with them. So I think we have a natural, and this is my bias and there's no like right or wrong, but you can think about, and I encourage everyone to explore like with the camera, go play, try things, get really close, get really far, and see what is it that it makes you feel. And then you say, okay, well, I've changed this, I've gotten really close. And then say, okay, well, what if I change the lighting a bit? What if I make things dimmer? Is this here going to change the way you feel about like my relationship to you, right? These effects that are possible with light and lens, they have the potential to have emotional reactions in people. And I think that is what filmmakers have learned to do. It's a young art form, and we are discovering how to manipulate the frame, the background, the light to create this and elicit this emotional response, which dancers have been doing pre-verbal, humanity, right? Before we could speak, we could move. And then whereas like, well, what are we trying to communicate with our movement? And if you go way back, or if you have pets, then, all their communication is with their body. Sometimes they make a sound, but we are conveying all the time with our bodies. So film is another form of saying, I want you to look at this in this way, this close, this far, this lit, this dark, this grainy, this blurry. And we're going to play with all that and see how it makes you feel. All right, so I was going to, and I think I have a picture here about, I'm going to switch over into shutter speed, right? We've talked a bit about background, and we're gonna go back to shutter because it's important. Now, what do I have here? If I go there, and I go there, that's not it. How about that one? Yes, much better. Okay, so here we can see the super exciting hand waving, popular amongst all mathematicians. So I want you to compare some of these images. I want you to look at this one. And now I want you to look at this one. And then I want you to look at this next one. Yeah, let's get some motion going there. Okay, great. Now there's some action happening. All right, so which one's the blurriest? Is it this one?
Yes.
Okay, it's that one versus this one versus this one, right? So this one here is the least blurry. Then there's this thing. And then there's this one, which for some reason is starting way over there. Oh, there's a little lag in my software. Okay, so this is an example of changing the shutter speed. What I've done here is obviously my hand in front of a darker background. And one of these has a shutter angle or shutter speed. They're all shot at 24 frames a second, right? And I would reduce it, but this one here, which is the longest, this was shot at 24 frames a second, 24 FPS, but the shutter speed was shot also at 24, right? So you have your whole time that you're shooting for 1 second, right? This is 1 second in time, and you're taking up that entire time to expose the frame, versus shooting at 1/48 of a second. Like if this is 120, this is I'm backwards because I've got my, this is an interesting thing. I had the flip on, and now it's, okay, now things make sense to me. Right, so this is 1 second, or this is 1/24 of a second from here to here. And that blurry image, right, I'll just leave it up. That blurry image is being recorded for the entire 1/24 of a second. Consequently, it's the blurriest because it's capturing light that whole time. Now, when I shoot it much faster, and this one here, this one is being caught at 1/200th of a second. So in the time span of 1/24 of a second, 24 frames per second, I'm only recording for this little fraction here. And then it's going to the next second, right? and then it's doing the other first instance of the exposure. And so it's capturing a very brief interval of time and light, and thus it is sharp, right? You're seeing the sharpness, how sharp that hand waving is. So I bring this up to talk about blur and also how we relate to blur, right? Because everything that you control in the camera has the potential to be an emotional hint. So what does blur, right, mean? And I think we talked about this last time. And so, but for the benefit of people who are just watching this section, can any of you talk a little bit about what happens when you see something that's a sharp kind of like sports broadcast versus something that is shot very slow and languidly and blurry like?
Well, you get a sense of motion when you have the bit of blur. You actually, because our eye doesn't capture the sharp tackness that they do in sports either. And depending on how much blur, if you really have a lot, it actually allows the imagination of the viewer to kind of have a role.
Mm-hmm. Surrender?
Gosh, now I've got to remember what we talked about. I don't remember. I mean, speed and time. I think it changes with the blur.
Uh-huh. So now, imagine you have, let me see here. That's what I want. All right, imagine you have a performance and you have this blurring action that's occurring. That's going to have a different kind of effect than something that is tack sharp, because there's a kind of clarity, right? When people talk about mystery or different types of emotions that you have in your day-to-day, what's the most, for yourselves, and I'm curious what everybody says, what's the most magical time of day for you, or the most like space where you feel in the daytime you have, I don't know, a magical spirit time where you have something happening to you emotionally that you're like, oh, you know what, I love this time of day. It makes me feel this way. Actually, let's just start there. Yeah. What's your favorite time of day and how does it make you feel?
I like evenings. Went for a drive since I went out to a performance last night and it was late. It was 10 p.m. I was out at 10 p.m. at night. And it was misty and dark and cool and everything just felt a little bit mysterious and magical. Yeah, evenings. I like evenings.
Anyone else?
I think even before I really got deep into the heart of filmmaking, I always loved sunrise and sunset. So golden hour going into magic hour at the beginning of the day and towards the end of the day. I think I probably lean more into sunrise than sunset. I mean, I don't know. I love them both, but I feel a molecular shift when I'm out at sunrise that I don't necessarily feel at sunset, but sunset allows me to like just decompress. So one opens me up and the other allows me to just kind of like release and ease out of something.
And how about you, Larissa? Oh, you're muted.
For me as well, sunrise and sunset, and it's a little hard to know if so many years being a photographer, if that's influenced it as well. But the lights, the tonality of the light, and there's a softness or something, it's not harsh.
Mhm.
And I think people in general respond to those times of days.
So it's interesting. I feel the same way. There's something for me, my favorite is twilight.
Mhm.
Just when things are getting dark. They haven't quite gotten dark yet. The fireflies are out. For me, that is a magical time where nymphs are out and there's great magic in the air. But also, on the flip side, in the morning, right, you have this sunrise, which is interesting because that's considered in photography, as everybody here probably knows, one of the golden hours.
Mhm.
Right? So you have this golden hour, which is in the morning, and then you have this evening golden hour, which is also just before sunset. And there are these two moments, but I actually like the moment after sunset a little bit later. And in the morning though, I like the full morning. But now think about this. In the mornings, the sun has just risen and there's often dew and fog that's coming up, right? The sun is about to come up and you still might have some fog and haze that's still in the air, which the light is then streaming through and hitting, if you're a photographer, your subject, or it's hitting whatever it's hitting, right? And then that same similar thing can happen in the evening where the sun is set and now you start seeing this fog, in the late times. So there are these two clear moments where you have the likelihood of dew and moisture in the air, which are morning and evening. But then in midday, that's usually or often has burned off, right? If it's not a cloudy day and it's a bright sunny day, things are clear, things are sharp. There's not as much haze aside from pollution. But in the past, when we were ancient souls, there wasn't that much pollution. You're away from a volcano. And so things were clear. So emotionally, I think what's happening, and this is just my opinion, is that we have this intuitive sense of like, how does haze and fog fit into our feelings? And also transitioning from kind of like, I was asleep and now I'm waking up and clarity is occurring to things are fully clear now. I'm at noon, I'm getting things done, to I'm getting ready to ease back down and now the fireflies are out and things are going back to rest. So I think what has happened is that filmmakers have said this evening time and this morning time are these hazy times where magic can kind of happen because of the sun and fog and haze. And so people create mystery with these effects. And I think that's why we have a lot of films that are shot, and when they want to create ambiance and space, you get this kind of haze, right? And a lot of film production, people often ask like, oh, how do you make the cinematic look, right? Well, a very simple way is to be shooting in these golden hours when there's haze and low angle light. And they also will, that's the easiest way. The other way that filmmakers do it is they actually blow haze into the room or incense or something to give it kind of a foggier space. And that light that then comes through there has a thicker quality to it. So jumping to the point, if you want to get a foggier look, you're kind of emulating these times of day where the light is low in the angle. And interestingly, like in theater and in dance, right, it's rare that you want house lights on, right, where everything is super sharp and super clear. You can just see everything and you're like, oh, this is not the production I was aiming for, right? Usually people want to use shins, right? They want to use things from the side, and they're even, you're right, they're flagged, or not, that's the film term, right? But what's the term on the sides with the, help me out here.
Raking?
The fabric that hangs down?
No.
Skims. Wings? Are you talking about
Wings.
wings? Yeah.
Wings. Thank you. Wings, right? So wings are channeling light, right? So when you're when you're in a studio, you've got the wings and they're channeling the light and they're limiting where the light will go, right? Which is somewhat like sunset, sunlight. So when you're filming, think about, can you, skipping ahead, way ahead to lighting, but shaping this light is one way of emulating these kind of moods, where you're shaping the light and you're picking the light angle, right? So you've picked a light angle, you might have added some haze to the room, and now you've created a tone or a time, perhaps a time of day that you're emulating with that. So that in combination with grain, blur, which your eye might be naturally doing, right? And controlling the focus of, like, who's, what is in focus. Those things you all build together to create a mood or an association with the audience in the mindset of the viewer. All right, so I've gone on 4 minutes long, according to our schedule. Yes, Surinder?
Yes. I mean, did we want to take another quick little break and then we'll reconvene for our mini project?
Sounds good to me. How does everybody else feel?
Actually, before we do that, I always forget, were there any questions about what we just discussed?
No, I thought it was great. Anybody else?
I liked all of the different photos. And your hand waving was, I really understood. Yeah, I liked it.
Okay, good. Good. Excellent.
So let's take a fast 5 minutes. We'll reconvene at 2:20.
Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. All right, so now we're going to do an exercise. I want us to, well, let's do an assessment of like what we have access to. Does everyone have access to a cell phone that they can shoot on, or some type of camera that they're willing to shoot on? Just toss me a thumbs up and so that I can see everybody's okay. All right, cool. And does everyone have access to some type of editing software, whether it's iMovie or Premiere, or Larissa, do you have some type of, okay, awesome, perfect. Okay, let's just, Enki went over ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. And he also mentioned lens size, and from my understanding, everyone on the call is experienced with the camera, correct? So like when I say terms like a wide shot, a medium, and close up, we know what those are, right? Okay, great, awesome. A transforming shot, do we know what that is? Is there a collective understanding of what that is? Transforming shots, basically you start in either standard coverage or a frame, an idea, and then the camera is going to move and shift and land on either a different frame size or in a new position. Sometimes you can use a transforming shot to follow a subject. So maybe you're starting with, you have that subject in a wide shot and you want to end that particular take in a close-up, that would be considered a transforming shot. Basically, when the camera starts in one position and it moves into a new position to change the perspective, often to another shot size. So does everybody have any questions about a transforming shot? Are we clear on how and what that means? Awesome. When we use the term booming up, usually we would have a dolly to do this, but you could do it handheld. Booming up and booming down, does everyone understand what that is? So the camera starts in one position. We boom up. So ideally, we would have the camera position on a dolly that has either a lever or it's electronic, and it'll position the camera in one space, and it'll either push the camera up so that it lands on a different position, or it'll lower the camera down. So when we say boom up, that means we're taking the camera, elevating it to a new position, or booming down, taking the camera and booming to a lower position. What else
I
do
have
we
a
have?
question. What does, you said changing frame size? What does that mean?
Oh, got it. Okay. So we have the different lens sizes. You're a photographer, so you know 30. If we're shooting on a digital camera, 35 millimeters usually our widest. 25, we go to 18, and then we can go lower, so that we can get more information in that particular frame. So when we talk about a wide shot, that particular frame size, we're dealing with very specific lenses to either capture as much objective information and data as possible.
Okay, but you're not talking about, I'm going from 16:9 to, I don't, 5 by
No,
7.
aspect ratio, no.
Okay,
No,
okay,
no.
okay.
What am I looking at in the actual frame? Am I looking
Okay.
at a wide shot? Am I looking at a medium? Am I looking at a close-up?
Okay.
Frame
that makes
sizes
sense.
help us decide how we're going to design either our story using our shot sizes.
Okay,
And that's specific to our lens size.
okay, that makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay, no problem. All good.
And then I have another question, sorry. When you say like boom up and boom down,
Mhm.
is the lens staying in the same position? Or like if this is the subject here,
Mhm.
as you go boom up, is the lens staying looking at the object, or is the lens going up to like?
It's yes, and it's the actual dolly itself. It's just positioning the camera in a new space, a new particular point in space.
Okay.
So if you have a camera operator that wants to, as the camera's booming up, and wants to shift the lens to focus differently on the subject, that's also considered a boom shot. You're booming
Okay.
up.
Okay.
The booming up is the action of going from one point in space to another point,
Okay.
either above or below.
Okay.
That make sense?
Mhm.
Great. All right. So wide, these are the shot sizes we're going to play with today. Wide, a medium, close up. We're going to try to get a transforming shot in there. Remember, that's going from one shot size, one particular frame size, moving through space and landing on a different shot or a different idea. Yeah. And then we're going to do either you can boom up or you can boom down. Got it? So 5 different setups, 5 different shot sizes. Those are the goals. Everybody's okay with that?
I'm just writing things down because I remember. We want to go over it one more time.
We have a wide, yeah, wide shot. We're gonna try a medium. Close up. We're gonna try to get a transforming shot in there. And we can either boom up for a shot or boom down or both. Both, we'll call it a lanyard extra. So those are the goals. Now what we're gonna shoot, you're gonna open your cell phone and you're gonna go to your photos and you're gonna choose the first still image you have, the last still image you've taken in your phone. Doesn't matter what it is. So for example, you guys probably cannot see that because of the glare, but this is a white sheet of paper with some numbers written on it because I needed to get into a storage unit. So that's my last image. So it doesn't matter what it is, you're gonna take your last image in your photos and you're going to shoot the story behind the picture. You can make it up however you wish, but you're gonna use the same exercise that we did at the beginning of the section. You're gonna look at the image and you're gonna create story based on what, now you have an advantage because it's coming from a personal place because you probably took the picture. But you can go anywhere with this. So you're gonna figure out what the story is, and then in order to capture the story, you're gonna use those 5 different shot. You're gonna use the 5 different shot sizes as your shot list. Make sense? No judgment. Off the top of the dome, off the top of the head. Don't cheat. It's the first image in your photos. The story that comes from, you can make it up. As soon as you get it written down on paper, go ahead and shoot it. And then I believe we have to upload it as an unlisted video in YouTube. Is that correct, Surinder?
Yeah. So we can either, that's what we did last time, was just kind of like quickly pop it on YouTube. What we do need to recognize is maybe no music, because I think we had some music last time and it got flagged by YouTube. So either music that you own the license to, or no sound.
It got flagged as an unlisted video? Wow, that's interesting.
Oh, it's when we do the recording. So like, because we'll come back and we'll watch them together. And then because we're putting this recording
That's why.
online, that's where it flags.
Got it.
What if
Unless you have music you own, or you have rights to, I think you can do that.
Do you know if it would still flag if you use like the iTunes supposedly has music? I'm sorry, the iMovie in the phone has default music already that's like supposedly been licensed by Apple for common use.
No idea. We could try it.
Frank says two, meaning two fingers, too wide,
Too broad.
too broad.
Can you type it, Frank? Type it in the chat.
I don't think you can.
He can't type in the chat.
You put it in Discord. Can you put it in
Put it
Discord?
in Discord. You have
Oh my
That's why we have that communication tool.
wow.
dance it out, Frank.
We accept interpretive dance.
Yes. So I want you all to really look at whatever image you're doing. Two separate companies. Got it. Two separate companies.
All right.
Okay. So
Alvin, Ailey, and Cleo.
exactly. Really look at the image. Don't judge it. Just whatever comes up for you based on what emotional responses you're channeling or generating. Use that as your story. Does that make sense? And then when you are putting your story together, you don't have to use those shot sizes in that order. We want to think about story first. We want emotions second. How am I going to emotionally bring the character or the subject to the audience? How am I going to get the audience closer emotionally to the story? And then rhythm, basically how these images flow from one idea to the next. Got it? There's a whole bunch of other rules, but those are the three we're going to focus on today. Story first, emotion second, rhythm third. As long as you have those 5, 6 different shots inside of your design, you should be okay. Should be interesting. Let's see.
Okay.
So when do we reconvene? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, when do we want to reconvene? Like 2:45. That way we'll have 15 minutes to talk about it.
I would give yourself probably 5 more minutes. I mean,
All right.
I would yeah.
2:50.
I would say 2:50. And I know that's crunch time, but at least it'll give you some time to put some ideas on paper and then shoot the thing.
Okay.
Sounds good. All right.
Cool. Ciao. Have fun.
I don't know what I'm doing in iMovie. It's been so long since I've used it.
It's all good. Just send what you have.
I don't really know how to share it. I'm trying to save it, but it's just being weird.
Can you just copy paste the link and put it in, send it to me privately? While you're looking for that, I'm gonna pull up Larissa's video. And
I will say I cheated a bit because I just was doing this, filming some stuff for someone for a light installation, and that's my last picture. So I had done, we did night drone shots of this, and so I pulled them together. So I didn't actually film anything right now, and plus I don't really like being on the other side of the camera. I just like taking pictures. So
That's all good. Did you use the shot design? Did you use the shots that we like, the wide, medium?
yeah, I
close
try.
up?
Yeah, I mean, I went through and
Transforming.
pulled out ones that I felt, segments of them that I felt applied to what we were doing.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But I will, just so everyone else knows, I did not just shoot this right now. So, like the actual clips, video clips.
It's all good. Okay, here we go. This is Larissa's. Are you all seeing something that says photo AF light installation?
Yes.
I don't know why it says only 7. Oh no, okay, never mind. Never mind.
Okay, ready? Here we go. Oh, there we go. Nice. What's the story behind the picture? We'll do one. Well, Larissa, before you respond, we'll ask the group, and then you'll give us the real story. Thoughts? What's the story behind the picture? Group.
Oh, I can't see anyone. There we go. Ooh. I loved the nighttime city. I feel like someone is alone in their apartment looking out, or maybe it's a hotel. Maybe it felt more like a hotel when I go to a hotel and looking out at night to the city lights.
Nice. Any other thoughts? Story behind the picture?
It reminded me of, I don't know, a flyby of an arts group that I have heard of, United Visual Artists, from my time when I lived in New York. So I was like, oh, it's like kind of revisiting that experience for me emotionally.
What's the main subject? There was one thing that she focused on primarily in all of her shots.
Oh, I missed it.
Yeah, I think I missed it. Can we see it again?
Oh, we don't have time. Yeah, it was one particular building. So she started with that really beautiful wide shot, that drone shot. And then her second shot was the lens tilting on that particular building. And then she boomed in, and then she went closer to the building. And then what was the fourth one? It was,
I think I rotated around it or something.
Yeah. So it was really great how you kind of gave us an objective idea of landscape or a space. And then you brought us closer and closer to the subject so we can have a little bit more intimacy with that particular subject. It was cool. Very nice. All right, who's next? I only have one link in the chat.
I think mine's just processing. Let me find a link.
Enki, can you send yours? Can you place yours in the chat?
I am uploading it right now to YouTube.
Oh, you're still uploading. Okay.
Yeah.
All to the good. Okay, well then we do have to. So I'll replay Larissa's one more time while we're waiting. Where is it? Nope.
For those of you in Chicago, you can go see it until January.
Oh, cool.
I popped my link in the chat as well. See if that works.
Okay. Are y'all seeing Larissa's again? Nope.
No.
No.
Okay, sorry. I need to reshare it. My bad. We seeing it now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So panning of the landscape. Nice tilting down. Then I think the boom comes next. Yep. So then we see the billboard. We go push in on the billboard.
So I'll just give you some background on it. This is actually part of Chicago Architecture Biennial, and it's the available space this year is the theme. And so space above on rooftops is available. So it's a light installation by a light company from Paris that took the size of a billboard and used LED lights to create this light sculpture.
Cool.
And did you fly the drone?
Yes.
Nice. Beautiful work. All right, let's move into surrender. Sorry, where is the chat? Oh my gosh, where did it go? Oh my goodness. Oh, let me stop. Okay, here we go. All right. Are you all seeing a YouTube link?
Mhm.
Okay, great. Here we go. Oh,
Mhm.
Oh, that's weird. It didn't.
That was it?
There was more to it. I don't know. I guess it didn't do all of it, process all of it.
Those are
What?
cute.
What shots did you use?
I did a wide shot. And then I went in close to the box. Can you let me share screen? Maybe I can show it from my computer. Weird.
Yes. Hold on. Was that Enki? Enki, was that you with the water?
I guess so. I'm not sure. It shouldn't be, nothing should be playing.
No, I did that on my end. I wasn't sure.
Oh,
I have
yeah.
like multiple screens open.
Yeah,
Okay. Surinder, let's go. Let's watch Enki's real quick and then we'll go back to yours. Is that okay?
Yeah. Let me see if this will do it
Okay.
again.
Here we go. Are you all seeing, looks like a distorted kind of image, water?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
great. Nice.
Beautiful.
What's the story behind the picture? Collective?
The story
wait.
behind the picture.
Wait,
Um,
Enki, let us
sorry.
guess and then you tell us. Thoughts,
Okay.
story behind the picture.
Water is life or health.
Nice. Surinder, you have anything?
No. My computer. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I would say water is life. Water, for me, it was like the water that's held inside of the body has its own thing. And then you were able to give us the body itself. So like an internal idea of what water is and how it functions, but then it's tied to the body in some kind of way. Okay, what's the story behind the picture, Enki?
Well, I was collecting apps to show the students. So it started with this thing, which is like an app. And then Nejla and I discussed like, what do we feel about the water? So then we're like, oh, let's create a story about meditation in water and then flowing into the body or something like that. And then we're like, oh, I have that anyway. So that's where the story came from.
It was nice, very nice.
Very cool. What was considered your transforming shot, Enki?
When I pulled away from her eye and I went from close up to wide.
Cool.
And I tried to boom up a smidge as I stepped away. I count any millimeter difference as a boom.
Nice. I think the pull out into the boom would probably be considered the same shot. Do you know what I mean? That would be part of that transforming shot.
Yeah.
Cute though. I like it. Nice.
You packed a lot in like you got a story in a really small amount of time. It was perfect.
It was great. Okay, Surinder, let's try yours one more time.
Okay, let me I think I've got a new one in. Try that.
Okay, here we go. Let's see. I keep forgetting to share. Hold on 1 second.
I think it might be easier if everybody just clicks on the surrender link, and then they would take you to.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
That's cool. I mean, it's nice to do it as a community sometimes, you know?
Yeah. Definitely.
Here we go.
Here we go.
I like the dancing bodies.
Mhm.
Nice. What's the story behind the picture? Thoughts? Anything off the top of the dome?
Surrender is planning on redecorating her entire wall.
Yes. Anything else? Larissa, thoughts? Story behind the picture.
But I don't know, but I like the figures swaying back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
The last shot that didn't make it in there was actually the establishing shot that was my inspiration. For some reason, I don't know why it didn't buffer in there, but let me show it to you. It is that.
Oh,
So then it ended with that shot that kind of like pulled in.
Nice. Wow, that'll definitely shift the story too. Putting like an actual body at the end of that particular journey, you know? Why did you choose to use that, the boxes, I guess, or that wall? It looked like shelving as your establishing shot in this study.
It just reflects my brain. I think that I have lots of stuff going on. So there's just like lots of things. And then just, focusing on, I mean, the last photo in my camera was of me wearing that earring that I made. I mean, I make those shapes.
Cool.
They're jewelry. So I'm making that piece for a friend, and then I was wearing it. So I don't know,
Nice.
I like the dancing bodies. I like that it's being a dancer, but they're not physical bodies. They're shapes, abstract shapes.
Very nice. All right, you all. Well, thank you so much. If we had more time, we would go a little bit more in depth with some of these studies. But I've really enjoyed myself. So thank you for having me. Thank you for the opportunity to share. some of my expertise with you and some stories with you. And yeah, I'm on Discord. So if anyone wants to reach out, if you want me to look at something, or if you want to just bounce some ideas with me, I'm totally available and accessible. So just let me know.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Millicent.
much. Yeah, for everyone who's tuning in and watching this later, I encourage you to do the exercises with us, write down your thoughts, and engage with us through the Discord channel using workshop 2, where you would post everything. We'll also post all of our links to the videos that we just did in the Discord, so that you can feel like you have responses and you can ask Millicent or Enki or any of us questions. So please use that to engage with us as you're watching offline. Millicent, thank you so much. I learned a lot and I got really stressed out right at the end.
That's post-production. That's just what happened. Oh man, thank you all so much. I appreciate it.